It was the morning of Monday the 10th of December 2001, and Robert Schwartz had not arrived at work. His colleagues were worried because this was very unlike Robert, who had lived alone since his wife had died. Robert was a well-known scientist in the field of biometrics and DNA research, who had been working on DNA sequencing analysis at the Center for Innovative Technology in Herndon, Virginia, for the previous 15 years. Concerned for his welfare, his colleagues contacted a neighbor, Samuel Walsh, to check on him. Their concern was justified because Samuel found Robert's body in his log and slate farmhouse about 40 miles from Washington, D.C., and he had been murdered. The police were notified, and when investigators arrived, they found a gruesome scene indeed. Robert Schwartz had been fatally stabbed 32 times with a knife-like weapon just 2 days earlier. They'd found pecks carved into the skin on the back of Robert's neck, and this gruesome detail suggested that the murder might have ritualistic elements. The subsequent investigation unraveled a bizarre and lethal network of relationships. The murderer was deeply involved in role-playing games featuring vampire themes and had a strong interest in medieval wizardry and weaponry. His confession about the murder shocked the entire country. Welcome to Grim Riddler's Crime Stories. Our case today blurs the line between dark fantasy and chilling reality. It's a twisted tale of betrayal, manipulation, and a descent into a world where role-playing games turn deadly. As the police started combing through the scene, they found no real clues which could point them to a killer or killers. All they could do now was to notify his 3 children of his death and start interviewing his neighbors. And the neighbors turned out to be very helpful indeed. They reported that they'd seen 3 teenagers, 2 boys and a girl, arrive at the farm during the time in which the murder was estimated to have occurred. The kids had got their cars stuck in the mud and called a tow truck to get them out. Giving their names and addresses to the tow truck driver made it really easy for the authorities to find them. Within days, the police had arrested Kyle Hulbert, aged 18, Michael Pfohl, aged 21, and Katherine Inglis, aged just 19. After the 3 started talking, it was clear that Kyle had killed the victim, but his bizarre confession and the reasons he gave initially pushed investigators in entirely the wrong direction. The police seized several knives, swords, and documents about human sacrifice from the home of Katherine Inglis and Michael Pfohl. The X on Robert's neck was assumed to be an occult symbol. They had seized a computer and 2 black cloaks, and also took a computer from Kyle's home. It wasn't long before they had pieced together a strange and very deadly game. The suspects turned out to all be friends of Robert's college-aged daughter, Clara, aged 19. Clara Jane Schwartz was born in 1982 and grew up at her family's 20-acre farm in Loudoun County. They have a swimming pool at Horses, which she loved spending time with, but things got tough when she was 10. Her mum got sick with an aggressive cancer and passed away when Clara was just 14. This really hit Clara and her family hard. Her dad tried to help her cope by buying her a horse of her own, as she loved riding. He'd hoped this would give her something to focus on. Despite this, Clara started to change. She got into goth culture and liked listening to Marilyn Manson and other similar types of music. She also got into role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons and loved going to Renaissance fairs. She was different from her siblings. Her sister Michelle was popular and did well in school, and her brother Jesse had just started college. This made her feel apart from her peers and very insecure. In high school, Clara stood out because she was different and she didn't make many friends. She did find a small group who shared her interests, and this is where she met Katie Inglis and Katie's shy boyfriend Michael Pfohl. They spent hours together listening to music and diving deep into role-playing games. Clara played a game called The Underworld, and she was ruler of this game. Again, Robert wasn't too worried at first. He was happy she found something she liked, but as her grades fell, he started pushing her to focus more on school. They argued a lot, and apparently he threatened to stop paying for her studies if she didn't improve her grades. In 2001, Clara Schwartz started a plot against her father. She was focused on her own game, The Underworld, and sought to involve more people in it, including Patrick House, whom she dated briefly. As standard police practice, investigators began looking at the Schwartz family and pulled the phone records to Clara Schwartz's dorm room. A call from Kyle had come in around the time police surmised that Robert Schwartz had been murdered. On December the 9th, police interviewed Clara, who lied about receiving any telephone calls. She quickly implicated Kyle and tried to distance herself from the affair.
I didn't believe them. I thought they were joking. Dad didn't like me very much. I got the impression they rather hated me. Because, he wanted me to be like Michelle. He wanted me to be popular and normal, and I don't want to be. It's rather boring.
She couldn't explain the note found in her dorm listing the fantasy names by which she and her co-conspirators went, and asking High Chaos to bestow true honor upon their souls. A prosecutor later explained what the government considered to be the meaning of the note. "Sex guys for killing my dad," said the Assistant Commonwealth Attorney Jennifer Wexton. That's what the document meant. Clara's arrest in February 2002 followed, and she was charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and solicitation to commit murder. Her arrest concluded a 2-month investigation that revealed her manipulative influence on her friend son Kyle, who from a young age had struggled with mental illness. He bounced between foster homes and psychiatric institutions since the age of only 7. His dad, Nat Hulbert, said Kyle thought of himself as a ninja warrior and loved internet role-playing games and vampire stories. Friends mentioned that Kyle often carried a dagger and talked about drinking blood. "Kyle doesn't know where fantasy ends and the reality begins," his father said. "He thinks this is all a game, but there's no reset button." Kyle spent lots of time in online chat rooms where some knew him as Demon. His behavioral problems started when he was a boy. His family tried to care for him, but eventually he needed help from social services. Kyle had recently been helped by Prince William County Social Services, and he graduated the year before from PACE, a county school program for students with emotional and behavioral problems. Friend Rummel, who worked for the program, said he often carried a big sword or a double-edged dagger. Elizabeth Robinson, his former foster mom, remembered Kyle as caring and friendly. He played baseball and video games with neighborhood kids and was protective of them all, but after turning 18, Kyle stopped taking his medication. Robinson said he became withdrawn and quiet, spending hours alone. He just wasn't himself without his meds, she said. His involvement in the murder was a tragic culmination of his mental health struggles and susceptibility to Clara's manipulation. Clara's elaborate plan led not only to her father's death, but also to the destruction of many lives, including her own. Clara's trial exposed her careful planning and manipulation, despite her claims of joking about the murder. Her lawyers argued it was impossible to conspire with someone as mentally unstable as Kyle. They argued that Clara's silly dark world clashed disastrously with Kyle's dangerous one, but the prosecution had a surprise witness, her ex-boyfriend Patrick House. He testified, but in her game underworld, Clara was Lord Chaos, and House was an assassin. "She ordered me to kill old Guy, her evil father, in the game." When he realized that Clara seriously wanted him to kill her father, he broke up with her and distanced himself from her. The defense tried to discredit House, highlighting his belief in dragons and spellcasting to suggest that both young men might have misunderstood Clara. Patrick House and Kate Inglis told the court that Clara hated her dad. In September 2001, at a Renaissance fair in Maryland, Clara, along with friends Patrick, Kate and Michael Pfohl, met Kyle Hulbert, a young man with a profound mental illness. Dressed in a cat costume and armed with a sword, Clara was quickly pulled into Clara's narrative of alleged abuse at the hands of her father. By November, Clara's stories of her father's mistreatment and her fear of being disinherited had convinced Kyle, Kate and Michael of the danger she was in. After a visit to her college, Clara began communicating regularly with Kyle, who was deeply immersed in a fantasy world which was exacerbated by his mental illness. In December 2001, the plan to murder Dr. Schwartz was put into action, and Clara sent Kyle $60 to cover expenses for that. Kyle, along with Kate and Michael, drove to the Schwartz residence where Kyle, believing he was protecting Clara, brutally murdered her father Robert with a sword. The next day, Kyle confessed the act to Clara. Katherine Inglis provided more details of the night. She and Michael Pfohl had driven Kyle to the Schwartz residence on December the 8th. Hulbert went to the house with a sword while Nora and Michael waited in their car. While waiting, they tried to turn the car around, but got stuck in the mud and had to call a tow truck to pull them out. By this time, Kyle had returned and Laura noticed his sword had bloodstains on it. That night, Nadab and Heather by about visiting the Schwartz home for Clara, but finding nobody there. Kyle invoked his Fifth Amendment rights and refused to testify at her trial. His written confession and a document from Clara's room thanking her accomplices were admitted as evidence. The prosecution presented a strong case, including a friend's testimony that Clara's desire for her father's death and Inglis's account of Clara discussing her father's abuse. After a week of testimony, the jury deliberated for only 4 hours before convicting Clara of first-degree murder. Clara Schwartz faced her brother and sister in court, and both testified that no sentence, no matter how severe, could bring justice. Michelle Schwartz, 22, told the judge that she is haunted by nightmares of her father's last moments and that the sight of a knife makes her uneasy. Jesse Schwartz, 25, said he thinks of his father's death and his sister's role every day. It's been nothing but a nightmare since the first day I found out, Michelle Schwartz testified. It's hard enough that it was my father, but on top of that to have my sister committing such a horrible crime. Judge Thomas Horn sentenced Clara to 48 years, meaning she could be released at age 61 or 68, depending on sentence reduction. Clara displayed no emotion as she left the courtroom, not looking at any relatives, some of whom had testified against her. Kyle was charged with first-degree murder, and his trial was set for March the 17th in Loudoun County. A week before the trial, Kyle said guilty to murder. He said he regretted his actions and the influence that Clara had on him. He claimed he had felt manipulated and constantly thought about his actions. Kyle confessed that he killed Dr. Schwartz alone. He said it wasn't premeditated and that his friends didn't know about it. In a police statement, Kyle said he became obsessed with visions of Clara crying and that he was convinced that her father would kill her during a planned family trip to the Virgin Islands. Kyle thought he was a vampire and heard voices telling him to do things for a good cause. He thought he was saving Clara from her dad, and in his 7-page confession, he described exactly what had taken place on the day of the murder. The following is that part of the confession. Dr. Schwartz answered the door, and Kyle asked if Clara was there. When told she wasn't, he asked if he could get her number, and he would invited him. Kyle used the bathroom, and then followed a 57-year-old to the dining room and confronted him. Kyle accused him of abusing his daughter, and he believed he saw guilt in the man's eyes that amounted to confession. The man had smiled, he said, and then backhanded him, which cut him over the left eye. That had triggered the attack. Kyle said that he did not remember carving an X on Dr. Schwartz, and the investigators concluded that it was probably an incidental slash mark rather than something ritualistic. But Kyle insisted that if he had not seen material evidence of the man's guilt in his face, he would have allowed Dr. Schwartz to live. Using the sword to slash and stab, he brought Schwartz to his knees, although the dying man continued to try to defend himself. Somewhere in the back of my mind, someone laughed at a fool who would grab an attacker's blade, Kyle said. I stamped him and felt his grip loosen. I told him to back off and let me pass. He claims that Dr. Schwartz just grinned at him. He came at me again, and I put some of his blood in my mouth. It drove me into a frenzy, he said. I just kept stabbing and stabbing the man in the back. Kyle then described Dr. Schwartz his last moments, saying that he looked up at me and asked, "What did I ever do to you?" With that, Kyle had delivered the final blow, killing him. Kyle said he had come back to his senses, keened up and left. He asked for forgiveness in his confession. Psychiatrist Howard Glick testified that Kyle had created imaginary friends and felt a strong connection with Clara, whom he saw as a sister needing protection. Kyle's actions stemmed from a desire to fulfill fantasies of heroism. Judge Horn sentenced him to life imprisonment without parole and an additional 10 years for conspiracy. On December the 20th, Michael Pfohl pleaded guilty to second-degree murder for his role in the murder of Robert Schwartz a year earlier. Pfohl's written apology included a request for a sign from Schwartz and an excuse for Kyle, believing Kyle thought he was doing the right thing. Michael Pfohl and Katherine, who played accessory roles in the crime, received their respective sentences. Pfohl's guilty plea to second-degree murder resulted in the maximum sentence of over 21 years, while Inglis served a 12-month sentence, reflecting her lesser involvement. She had only 6 more days to serve at the time of sentencing. And so we come to the end of this case. The tragic story of Kyle Hulbert and Clara Schwartz teaches us a lot about mental health and the risks of being manipulated. Kyle's mental health problems played a big part in what he did. Kyle's rough childhood left him looking for a place to fit in. His delusions and hallucinations made it easy for someone to manipulate him. Clara's control over Kyle shows how manipulative people can exploit someone's weaknesses. Fantasy role-playing games played a big part in this story. Although for most young people and adults this is just fun and safe, it's good to be aware of this risk for vulnerable children and adults. Friends and family keeping an eye out and talking openly is super important. They can help by noticing changes in behavior. Catching early signs of trouble like withdrawal or getting too into fantasy worlds can lead to getting help before it gets out of hand. Schools and communities often have programs that teach about these topics. This can help reduce the stigma around mental health and encourage people to get help when they need it. In short, understanding, supported education, and easy access to help are essential in spotting warning signs and offering assistance to those who might be vulnerable to manipulation and mental health problems. If you or anyone you know seems to be struggling and you need support or advice, please contact someone to help. There is a link in the description to look up your country's helpline for support and assistance. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the tragic tale of the Robert Schwartz murder. Now we'd like to hear from you. What are your thoughts and reflections on the story? Have you had any experience with role-playing games? Please share your comments and insights below. If you found this video informative and thought-provoking, please don't forget to like and subscribe for more content that explores the human stories behind historical events. Thank you again for being part of our community. We look forward to your feedback. Stay safe and stay curious.